नन्दिनि नन्दितमेदिनि विश्वविनोदिनि नन्दिनुते गिरिवरविन्द्यशिरोदिनि वासिनि विष्णुविलासिनि जिष्णुनुते भगवति हेशिति कण्ठकुटुम्बिनि भूरि कुटुम्बिनि भूरि कृते जय जय हे महिषासुरमर्दिनि रम्यकपर्दिनि शैलसुते सुरवरवर्षिणि दुर्धरदर्शिनि दुर्मुखमर्षिनि हर्षरते त्रिभुवनपोषिनि शङ्करतोषिनि किल्बिषमोषिनि घोषरते धनुजनि रोषिनि दितिश्रुतरोषिनि दुर्मथतोषिनि सिन्धुसुते जय जय हे महिषासुरमर्दिनि रम्यकपर्दिनि शैलसुते जय जय हे महिषासुरमर्दिनि रम्यकपर्दिनि शैलसुते जय जय हे महिषासुरमर्दिनि रम्यकपर्दिनि शैलसुते.
Hi guys, thank you for joining the live stream. Today we have back with us Sreejit Datta, a professor of philosophy. Hello Sreejit, thank you for joining us again.
Hello Niranjan, as always it's a pleasure to join College Street Kolkata podcast.
Thank you. And today we are going to discuss a legendary personality called Benoy Kumar Sarkar, about whom I don't know much, just like most of you all who have done a basic cursory search on Wikipedia. I just know that he was known for being a Nazi sympathizer, a fascism sympathizer, and then some people said that no, he actually should not be characterized that way. I've read some articles like that as well. The only thing we have read by him, actually on this channel itself, we did a live stream while discussing the famous paper written by him called the Hindu perspective in international relations, or something like that. I forget the exact name, but that's all I know about him. So, sir, Sreejit, firstly, can you start with just this one question, and then you can say whatever you want about him, which is that many sociologists I know, even from the usual leftist backgrounds as well, who have tremendous respect for Binoy Kumar Sarkar. Whenever I bring up that name in front of those people who hate Hindutva, BJP, everything, they speak of him in a reverential tone, like "show me ho" in Bengali. Okay, how is that?
I think two things can be said about why they have a sort of reverential attitude, or at least an appearance of it. One, because Professor Sarkar was highly empirical in his approach. And as you can see that any left-oriented or leftist, or let's say Marxist historian, sociologist, or anybody who has something to do with social sciences or humanities, they like to pin down everything on material culture, right? So they would find it more comfortable if they see less idealism and more of empiricism in a particular scholar or a writer's work. So I think that is one reason. The other reason, although it might sound a little cynical if I say it, is that I think the reverential attitude that you may have observed is very superficial. You know, it may be just for the sake of appearances, mainly because the man has original ideas, and he has written so copiously that you cannot basically ignore him and sideline him just like that, because Binoy Sarkar had understood right from the beginning of the 20th century. I'm talking about the early years, 1905 onwards,
right?
Especially from 1905 to 1914, he was an active member of the National Council of Education, Jatiyo Shiksha Porishad. And as a member of that, he had instituted this practice of producing written research material. Whatever thought that him and his peers were generating, he always emphasized on publishing them, making them publishable.
Right.
So naturally, the output, the written output that he has is huge, which is
Yeah.
if you compare that, if you compare Professor Sarkar's written output with somebody like Acharya Brojendranath Sheel, or maybe even Acharya Krishna Chandra Bhattacharya, two great philosophers of late 19th and early 20th century from Bengal and India. It's nothing. I mean, both Bhattacharya and Sheel, they have produced a very meager amount of written material when you compare, that with
Okay. Okay.
Professor Binoy Kumar Sarkar's output. So
Right.
that may be another reason that the leftists uh, show a sort of superficial reverence because they are, slightly and secretly afraid of or in awe of his written output. So
Yeah.
they cannot right away cancel him, to use today's terminology.
Yeah.
And therefore they have to sort of like we say in Bangla, just chalkola batasha dewa, uh, that sort of cursory respect or puja they
Right.
offer to him.
Right. Okay. Okay, sir. Now, before you start, let me just tell you one thing that from time to time I keep putting some comments on the screen, but that's not for you to answer. Okay, they are just for me if I want to highlight a comment specifically. Okay, so you just ignore
Sure.
those comments and you go ahead. Okay,
Yeah,
sir.
in any case we can take up questions any point if you like. I
Okay.
mean,
Okay.
I don't mind that.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
So you suggested that I say something about Professor Binoy Kumar Sarkar. Well, I think uh, there are a few points that I would like to highlight. In any case, like I have already suggested, the amount of his written work and and the range of topics that he has touched upon, not just touched upon, the range of topics that he has penetrated into is so vast that perhaps it is a laughable attempt to try and capture this man and his work within the span of just an hour or so.
Yeah.
But even then, just to give an idea of who Professor Binoy Kumar Sarkar was and why he is still relevant for uh, for our times. Uh, Professor Sarkar was born in Malda, in undivided Bengal, and he was born in 1887. Okay,
Okay.
so by the time he had come of age, it was already the time of the Swadeshi movement.
Yeah.
So you can see that Swadeshi movement would have a great impact on his character, so much so that it would mold the very shape of his mind. And that's exactly what had happened. We get to see that whatever Professor Sarkar has done throughout his life in terms of scholarship, in terms of the work that he is known for, is unmistakably marked or tagged by the effort of a very particular aspect of the Swadeshi movement, and that is national education. Something that we have already spoken about
Yeah.
in terms of other personalities. When we were
Right.
talking about personalities like Acharya Satish Chandra Mukhopadhyay or Brahmabandhu Upadhyay,
Yeah.
or even Rabindranath Tagore, right?
Yeah.
So it was Acharya Satish Chandra Mukhopadhyay's Dawn Society, where a young teenage Binoy Kumar Sarkar was nurtured in terms of both his mind and soul.
Oh.
This is not just nice verbiage that I'm using when I say that his mind and soul, intellect and heart, both were nurtured at the Dawn Society of Acharya Satish Chandra. It is actually the case. You know why? Because firstly, along with Radha Kumud Mukherjee, the great historian, who was slightly older than Professor Sarkar, Professor Sarkar and several other young men were an integral part of the Dawn society.
Hmm.
So much so that they used to take a very keen interest, and day to day participation was also there in terms of organizing the talks, inviting the people who would come and deliver lectures at the Dawn Society. Because if you remember from our discussion on the Dawn Society, when we had this episode on Acharya Satish Chandra, that there used to be uh, two classes weekly, one on Tuesday and the other on Friday, I think, where two different segments or two different kinds of topics were discussed. One on general knowledge, where anything under the sun could be discussed, which has relevance to nation making. It could be politics, it could be sociology, it could be art and culture, anything, just about anything. So it was a huge range of topics that were discussed during that general studies or general knowledge day, or discussion of general knowledge
Okay.
on Tuesday classes. And the
Okay.
other day, I think, was on Friday, when they used to discuss at the Dawn Society how to shape or mold the characters of young men and women, especially young men, because at that time, just about that time, we did not get to see so many women, any significant number of young women coming out of, the household and taking part actively. But that, of course, increased later on
Yeah.
with the active participation of Sister Nivedita and other people. So on that Friday class, they used to have what they called moral lectures, but mainly it was a class on the Bhagavad Gita.
Hmm.
Nilkantha Pandit used to give a very explanatory, analytical sort of discourse. He used to offer such kind of discourses on the Bhagavad Gita, and on the general knowledge part, it was mainly Radha Kumud and Binoy Sarkar, young men,
Oh.
both of them were,
Okay.
who used to decide, along with Acharya Satish Chandra, who's going to be the next speaker for a session.
Okay. Okay.
And subsequently, both of them, or sometimes Binoy Kumar alone, would approach them, request them, explain to them the significance of the Dawn Society lectures, and they used to invite them over. So this work was something that was going on the shoulders of people like Binoy Kumar Sarkar and Radha Kumud Mukherjee. So
Okay.
just giving you this perspective so that we can appreciate how direct a role Professor Sarkar had as a young man, as almost a teenager, in running something so significant and so unique. Uh, and we get to see a reflection of this in the kind of work that he undertook later on. I mean, starting a journal on his own, where scholarly articles were published, and he used to edit them himself. This is something that he had almost taken up as a legacy of the Dawn Society and the Dawn magazine, right? Because the Dawn magazine was a very important part of the Dawn Society. And it had for a long time, almost for 16 years, 16 years, been a mainstay of scholarly and even political discussions for the young Bengalis of the Swadeshi era. So when the Dawn magazine was finally closed down, the kind of journals that people like Binoy Sarkar used to edit and run, they were basically filling the gap or the void created by the absence of the Dawn magazine. So that is a kind of idea that we can get of Professor Sarkar's organizational skills. But Professor Sarkar should be remembered, I think, for the reason that he was a profoundly original thinker. And when I say original, it should be emphasized very, very highly. You can bolden the characters, you can italicize it, you can underline it, do everything just to. But even then, it won't be enough if we emphasize this particular adjective about Professor Sarkar's work. Original in thought, original in approach, in research approach, and also original in expression. Because especially in his Bengali writings, we get to see this sort of originality in expression. He himself has said that he used to follow the style of writing, especially in Bengali prose, of three or four people. I think there were four people. Ramendra Sundar Trivedi, who used to write on scientific and philosophical topics. Akhay Chandra Sarkar, then Haraprasad Shastri, the great historian, and Hirendranath Datta, the philosopher. So these are the four scholars and literateurs who had very deep influence so far as Professor Sarkar's expression, his style of writing were concerned. Apart from that, the originality of Professor Sarkar's personality, of course, reflects in the kind of approach that he has taken. To explain this, let me first say who were the sort of thought leaders who had influenced him. He, by his own testimony, we get to see that Acharya Satish Chandra Mukhopadhyay and Swami Vivekananda, they were regarded by Professor Sarkar as the greatest influences on his own thought, on his own character, on his total personality. But from both these men, from both these great protagonists of the national movement, of the Swadeshi approach, I should say, Professor Sarkar differed almost radically. In what regard? And that is the original aspect of his thought, which we get to see in many, many books that he has written, especially with respect to the political view of ancient Hindus. To explain this unique view, let me just say how the view used to be for the generation previous to Professor Sarkar. So I just mentioned Vivekananda and Satish Chandra Mukherjee, both of whom had great influence on Professor Sarkar's character and thought. Now, if we look at the kind of worldview that Vivekananda and Satish Chandra Mukhopadhyay or even Rabindranath used to have, in that worldview, we get to see India as essentially a spiritual land, as a spiritual culture or civilization, where the essential character of Indian thought is characterized by spiritualism, by a religiosity which is distinct, and where there is, in some corner, a sense that this spiritualism and religiosity, this sort of higher realm of existence, is not just unique to India, but also, even if some concession is given by these thinkers that the West or other parts of the world also have these features like spiritualism or religiosity, India is anyway in all respects superior to these other parts of the world when it comes to religion, spiritualism and religiosity. So this was the essential worldview where India's characteristic, the very character of India's thought and essence, the essence of India was spiritual and religious. And that sort of worldview is also something that we get to see in the writings of Western thinkers, In fact, Professor Sarkar himself points out that Professor Max Muller was one of the pioneers of creating this sort of impression about India, especially in the West, and also downstream from his writings, influencing Indians as well, that India is a land of yogis and mystics. So India is a mystical land. It's a land of mystics. It's a land of mysticism and spiritualism. From that particular worldview, Professor Sarkar takes a 180-degree opposite view, and he says that India is as materialistic as the West. India is as religious or spiritualist as the West. So essentially, what he is saying is that the character of uh, the human race is essentially the same, and it is simply a kind of romanticism to think of a particular country or civilization or even a continent to be representative of any one particular aspect of human character and thought. Okay, so to emphasize, let's say, imperialism when we are talking about the West is something that would be considered as a wrong view by Professor Sarkar. Okay, so essentializing the West as a materialistic, as an imperialistic continent or culture would be wrong in Professor Sarkar's view. And at the same time, in Professor Sarkar's view, it would be equally wrong to essentialize India as a land of mystics and as a land that is obsessed with the afterlife, otherworldly thought, spiritualism, and all that stuff. That would also be wrong in Professor Sarkar's view, and he would emphasize that in different periods or eras of history, if we analyze the characteristic of India, we get to see almost, not almost, he would emphasize that it is equally aggressive when it comes to military expansionism, when it comes to imperialism. So, imperialism is something that Bipin Chandrapal had defined only in terms of ideological imperialism, right? And even in that ideological imperialism, Bipin Chandrapal's main thrust, as we were discussing in the previous episode of our podcast, was on spiritualism, religion, and philosophy. Okay, and that philosophy was also inclined towards theological philosophy, okay, religious philosophy. But Professor Sarkar would say that that is a historical view. It's wrong from somebody's point of view who has had a larger perspective of history, who has seen the history of the Indian civilization from a very high vantage point, from where all the different eras or periods of Indian history can be scanned and analyzed and understood from different perspectives: economic, sociological, religious, even from military point of view also. And that sort of vantage point will compel this observer to conclude that India cannot be essentialized as a less materialistic, a less politically ambitious land, and a West as essentially an out and out aggressive, militaristic, imperialistic, materialistic land. So this view of Professor Binoy Kumar Sarkar was unique at the time when he started talking about it. You know, he started talking about it in 1914, I think, when he first brought out an annotated critical edition of the Shukra Niti Sara, which he had translated into English from Sanskrit. So let me tell you about the Shukra Niti Sara a little bit. So just like we have Shastra or scientific treatises on Dharma, meaning Dharma Shastra, on Kama, meaning Kama Shastra. We also have such kind of Shastra texts on Artha, that is, wealth in a very broad sense. Wealth not just in terms of money or just some material objects that
Yeah.
that make your life easier, but
Hmm.
that bring you weal, weal, that is an overall welfare and comfort in terms of the life that you are living, the life that
Hmm.
you are enjoying, and
Hmm.
also at that same time it will also include power or influence. So a
Okay.
pursuit of power as well as material comfort, both
Hmm.
of these are included in the ambit of Artha. So Artha
Hmm.
Shastra, not just Kautilya's Artha Shastra, the
Hmm.
Artha Shastra text that is ascribed to Kautilya,
Hmm.
but Arthashastra in a general sense, that is a
Okay.
field of knowledge
Right.
that covers concerns of Artha, the two
Hmm.
concerns that I have just mentioned, material comfort and uh, power or influence. So
Right.
within that, special focus is on Dandaniti, that is polity, how to do politics, how to
Hmm.
administer a country, and on that particular subject we
Hmm.
get to see a lineage of acharyas who have written copiously or compiled the thought of their previous acharyas in the form of niti sara texts. Okay, as a
Okay.
result of that we have texts like shukra niti sara ascribed to shukracharya, and also Kamandaka Niti Sara or Kamandakiya Niti Sara. So these are different acharyas who are attached to particular compilations of Danda Niti. So
Hmm.
this particular Niti Sara text ascribed to Shukracharya happened to be the one that Professor Sarkar had translated, and he had annotated it. So it was a critical edition that he had brought out. And from
Right.
around this time, this book got published in 1914, 1914. So around that time onwards, Professor Sarkar started thinking in this unique line, which I have just explained, that
Hmm.
India should not be essentialized as a land of mystics and as a culture that is only concerned with the
Yeah.
afterlife and religious philosophy, but
Right.
it also had almost an equal amount of zeal for gaining influence, gaining land, gaining wealth, and all sorts of resources that will
Hmm.
make the quality of life for Indians better.
Hmm.
So this is the unique view of Professor Sarkar, which has come to be known as Sarkarism in English.
Okay.
Okay,
Okay.
in Bengali, it has been described by Haridas Mukhopadhyay, who has written this fantastic conversational, book where he talks along with some other peers of his with none other than Professor Binoy Kumar Sarkar, called Binoy Sarkarer Boithoke. It's
Okay.
available in two volumes in the Days publishing edition.
Okay.
So in that particular book, we get to see, because it's a Bengali book, so the terminology used by Professor Sarkar are either translated or kept in their original Bengali as Professor Sarkar had coined them. And this
Okay.
Sarkarism is known as Sarkar Bad. So
Okay.
Sarkarism is this unique view of Professor Sarkar, which first gets reflected in this English translation of Shukraniti Sara by him. Then,
Hmm.
from 1914 to 1937, remember that Professor Sarkar passed away in the USA in 1949, in the
Hmm.
year 1949. So,
Hmm.
just 12 years before he passed away, 1937, was the conclusion of Mahabharat like project that he had taken, called series of books, 4 volumes basically, called Positive Background of Hindu Sociology. Okay, so let me just explain what positive means here. This term positive is actually borrowed by Professor Sarkar from the works of Auguste Comte. Okay, somebody who had a great influence on the generation previous to Professor Sarkar's. We have talked about Comte's influence on people like Bankim Chandra, and also to an extent on Chandranath Bose. So it is the same Auguste Comte whose positivism, which basically means an empirical approach, looking only at the material side of things, almost like the Marxists. That term, or the word positive, taken in the sense of that term, has been borrowed by Professor Sarkar in this title of his book, this mega mammoth project that he had started in 1914, and which got concluded only in 1937. 4 volumes of positive background of Hindu sociology, okay, in which Professor Sarkar basically explains, backs up his claim that can be described as Sarkarism with data, mainly mined from various Sanskrit texts, from Mahabharata, from Ramayana, from various Puranas, as well as definitely from the Arthashastra texts of Kamandaka, Chanakya or Kautilya, and Shukra, as well as from the Puranas. So, and also, I forgot mentioning the literary texts, from the texts or works by Kalidasa or Banabhatta or Shudraka, the plays and, the prose and the epics by great Sanskrit poets and authors. So, mining these ancient Indian texts, mainly available in Sanskrit and Pali, Professor Sarkar backs up his unique view on the character of Indian civilization, which is which he describes as the positive background of Hindu sociology. After this, he wrote another book called Futurism of Young Asia. This book came out in 1922, where he basically talks about the potentialities in terms of expansionism, not just in the realm of politics, not just in the realm of military expansion and material influence, but also ideological influence that will be exerted by various Asian countries such as India and Japan and China. So mainly Professor Sarkar looks at India and Japan, but he also talks a little bit about the Chinese scenario. And there, again, from the historical instances and also from contemporary historical instances, for example, how Japan had become militarily very aggressive, by attacking China, by attacking Russia, and giving, a sort of sound defeat to such countries. Japan had been emerging in the world scenario as a very aggressive and ambitious country.
Yeah.
India was still, under the British Empire and colonial country, under the thrall of British influence and British power. But Professor Sarkar was from that very early time, 1922, when he published this book called Futurism of Young Asia. He had already started talking about the potentialities that India holds within it as a free country, as and when it will become a free country, where India will start exerting its influence both in the spheres of realpolitik as well as ideological influence. So this was the other book that he had written. The final book that I would like to mention in this series of works, even though he had written numerous other books, it's very difficult for even me to, enlist the whole number or the whole series of books that he had written. But I'm just mentioning the special ones, which I think capture his ideas broadly. And that is Creative India. Creative India came out almost at the time of his uh, final years, when he was touring USA and giving lectures in various US universities such as Michigan University, Harvard University, and there in the Creative India, he talks about how creatively Indian politicians, Indian revolutionaries, Indian artists, as well as Indian thought leaders had presented, or rather started to present, a unique Indian point of view, which was something that he had partly imagined, but which was also very new to even him. So he was observing it as he was, as he used to greatly emphasize on empirical observation and talking on the basis of data. So he was collecting data, cultural data, census data, sociological data. He was looking at various indices that can give signals, important signals about the movement of Indian economy and society. So, based on all these observations, he came to the conclusion that India was creating something very new and very unique, which the world had not experienced before this particular point in time, that is middle of the 20th century. And before passing away, suddenly, it was rather young age. He was just 61 or 62 years old, and he had fallen sick during his lecture tour of the USA, and he passed away in a hospital that was designated specially and exclusively for the black people. It is something that I thought would be interesting to point out, that at the time when Professor Sarkar passed away in the USA, 1949, that was a time when the whites and the blacks were not treated in the same hospital. So when Professor Sarkar had fallen sick, he had to be rushed. He was rushed to one of these hospitals reserved exclusively for the blacks, and it is there that he passed away. While passing away, there is this interesting anecdote that Professor Haridas Mukherjee had recorded in Boitoke, in Bino Sarkar's Boitoke. Professor Sarkar's wife, Ida Sarkar, who was an Austrian woman, was by his side at his final moments. And Mrs. Sarkar asked him, "Do you feel sorry? Do you feel sad for me and for your daughter? He had a daughter, for your family. What are your final thoughts? Who are you feeling sad about?" Because he was visibly very pained, from that account. And Professor Sarkar answered, "I am thinking of my country, my beloved country, India, and I'm thinking about the unfinished projects that I had started as a young volunteer of the national education movement." So from this particular anecdote, we get an idea of the lifelong passion and fascination of Professor Sarkar, namely first India, and second national education, which was his weapon, which was his special method, which was his special path to serve his motherland. So he saw his entire life's work as a volunteer's work for the cause of national education in India. And he has described his world tour, especially his tours in the USA and in Europe. He had toured in Italy, in Germany, in England, and in France. And he described these tours as him spreading the mission of India's message all across the world. And that message of India is something that was unique, very different from the message that was spread by a previous generation of Indian thought leaders.
Okay, Srijita, lots of questions.
Yeah.
Firstly, I have just a bit of a curiosity. This is not directly to the related to the topic, but this book
Okay.
called Binoy Shathe Boitoke, or what was the name of the book?
বিনয় সরকারের
Binoy
বৈঠক।
Boitoke. Okay, okay. So was it like an actual conversation that they kept in mind and then he jotted it down?
No, he used to record those conversations. I don't know how. Maybe he used to, take the help of shorthand. And
Okay.
even though Professor Sharka's conversations were not recorded using electronic means,
Hmm.
I'm almost sure of that.
Yeah, that's
Uh,
right.
but Haridas Mukherjee, Professor Mukherjee, talks about the painstaking methods that he and his peers had followed to record the actual conversations. So I'm sure that they were using shorthand, and they also had prodigious memories. Each of these
Right.
people. I mean,
Yeah.
Professor Haridas Mukherjee, who is single-handedly responsible alongside his wife, Professor Uma Mukherjee, to record and preserve the real nationalist point of view in historicizing the Swadeshi movement. And because of the works of whom we can basically counter the works of people like Shumit Sarkar, the Marxist historians, right, who have written about the Swadeshi movement as well. So they had prodigious memory. They were geniuses in their own right. So they were producing the conversations from their memory at times, and at other times, I'm sure they were recording it on the go while they were conversing with Professor Sarkar himself.
Right. So that was basically a podcast of that era, right? So it was that book is essentially a transcription of the entire podcast episode.
Absolutely, that's a very nice way to put it.
Right. And actually, this question is related to that. This is a three-part question. Okay, you'll have to answer them all together only. The
Maybe you can
founding
ask
of-
this question in three parts.
Okay.
First part.
So, how was a society like Dawn Society funded? Who funded these things? And then the magazine. What was like? Did they go around gathering funds, or did they go to get hold of one businessman? How did that occur?
So, to begin with, the Dawn Society used to depend on the charity of people in the network of Acharya Satish Chandra Mukhopadhyay. For example, he was a classmate of one of the early principals after Pandit Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar had founded the Metropolitan Institution, okay, so, which is today's Vidyasagar College.
Yeah.
So that building of the earliest building of the Metropolitan Institution had two stories, the ground floor and the first floor. And one section of the first floor was charitably given away to the cause of the Dawn Society, because the principal was a very very close friend of Acharya Satish Chandra. And when it came to finding people who would talk about various topics, who would offer lectures, there was no question of any monetary transaction in it, because these people were enthused by the cause of national education themselves. I mean, just look at the names of the people who are offering these lectures: Bhagini Nivedita, Sister Nivedita, Brahmabandhu Upadhyay, Rabindranath Tagore, Bipin Chandra Pal. So these people were working with the mission of substituting the University of Calcutta, because the University of Calcutta in not just Bengal but all of northern India, and also in some areas of the southern India, had a great sphere of influence.
Right.
By that, what I mean is that students used to come from places as far as Karachi, Lahore,
Yeah.
Madras, or Chennai of today to study in the University of Calcutta, or
Yeah.
colleges under the university. So, for example, we have discussed Dr. Rajendra Prasad, the first president of the Indian Republic, happened to be a student of the Presidency College. By that time, of course, the Presidency College had come under the University of Calcutta. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you can understand that these people were driven by the almost revolutionary zeal, not almost, it is revolutionary zeal uh, to replace the influence and extent of
Field.
educational
Right.
educational ambit of the
Mhm.
University of Calcutta. They
Right.
wanted to create an alternative institute which will be run by people who have no affiliation with the government of India, the British
Hmm.
government, and
Hmm.
also who are revolutionaries in their thought themselves, who are Swadeshi driven.
Right. So the next part of this question is only that today, do you see Dawn Society, things like Dawn Society, in some other equivalent situations, or do we need to found Dawn societies today as well? Or if so, then how? Or is this like a Dawn Society as well, where I am asking you to give a talk only and educated people?
Oh, definitely. I think these individual initiatives can be described, borrowing the expression of V.S. Naipaul, thousand mutinies. So
Hmm.
basically, when we are trying to offer an alternative view from the
Hmm.
Sarkari view,
Hmm.
um, uh, where the Sarkar, even though it is a free India, we know for how many reasons and for how many factors,
Hmm.
the point of view, the approach is compromised, right?
Hmm.
And how the uh, nationalist point of view finds it very, very difficult to express
Yeah.
itself in any sphere, be it
Yeah.
education, be it historical point of view, be it economic
Yeah.
point of view.
Yeah.
So I think that there is a need to create or replicate the Dawn Society model in
Hmm.
as many ways as possible, in as many instances as possible, and in as
Hmm.
many areas also.
Hmm.
And at the same time, I think there is a need to find out the immediate goals. We have to also uh, identify and fix certain achievable goals.
Right.
Only by achieving such short term and mid term goals can we think of, or can we imagine to achieve something bigger in the cause of
Right.
nationalism in today's time. In 2024, it is very difficult to talk about nationalism. In
Hmm.
1905, it was rather easy to talk about nationalism. Why? Because at that time, it was a foreign government which would come with the danda and will beat you up and will maybe throw you from your job.
Yeah.
Like people such as Ashutosh Mukherjee, the legendary vice chancellor of the University of Calcutta, who was
Hmm.
a Sarkari knocker, but at the same time he was talking about Swadeshi education. He was talking about national education in
Hmm.
almost as vehement a critical term as Rabindranath Tagore, as Aurobindo, as Acharya Satish Chandra, and he
Yeah.
did not lose his job. See, he sort of kept getting higher and higher positions. So
Right.
it was easy to talk about nationalist position in 1905 to
Hmm.
1914. But
Right. There
today,
were so many legit nationalist historians also in the fold, just like there were non-nationalist historians as well. But legit nationalist historians had their credentials in the mainstream only, whether it's Nihar
yes,
Ranjan Rai or Jadunath Sarkar, all of them.
yes, and that's the very reason why I keep talking about these bhoot or ghosts as they are described by many fans of the Sarkari system or the Sarkari point of view. I mean, almost every day I have to face questions and criticisms like, why do you keep bringing up these ghosts of 19th century and early 20th century Bengal? And because I am also a Bengali, unfortunately, so I am tagged to be a Bangla Pokho like Bengali nationalist because I'm
Yeah.
talking about effing nationalists from Bengal.
Yeah. Now, then my question is, how can someone think such a such a bold idea like replacing the substituting the Calcutta University? So today, should we also think like that? Should we think of institutions that can replace JNU, CU, JU, or should we, let's say, metaphorically hijack those institutions and put somehow convince people in power to put nationalist scholars in positions of power in these universities? What should be the way forward?
Yes, we should imagine such bold goals, such grand goals. But JNU is not a grand goal, or even DU or CU. I think we should think of replacing, in terms of sphere of influence and educational ambit, Harvard or Yale or Columbia University, because these are the programs which are running, so to speak, JNU or any other, Sarkari university.
Yeah.
So our goal should be to replace the point of views and approaches of such universities which infest our thinking with an anti-nationalist or something that has a very, very critical approach to nationalism. I mean, it's all very good and welcome to do a reasoned critique of nationalists in India or anywhere in the world. We do need such criticisms. But to think and say and to assert and to make people believe that there is something inherently bad in loving your country and expressing that love. There is something inherently bad in trying to think of your ancestral culture as something that is valuable and fond and something worth preserving. That's preposterous. That's the kind of thinking. That's the kind of approach that we need to replace, and which is why we need to target replacing these Ivy League institutions.
Yeah. And what would be the model for replacing them? Like set up a small college for a while, or then ask for funds from private people like that. Like how Rishihood University, those kinds of universities are coming up.
No, I'm not sure of any university that has tried this sort of a thing.
Okay.
I do not think right now in India there is any university that is doing this sort of work. I think this can be started by scholars coming together and instituting a publication to begin with.
Acha.
You get to see that the Dawn Society, which is the precursor of National Council of Education, which in turn is the precursor of Jadavpur University,
Right.
had its inception in a publication, which is the Dawn magazine. Okay, so I think that our thought should be put out in rigorous analytical terms, in if we borrow Professor Sarkar's terminology, in positive terms, in publications, in the form of written material. We should try and publish a journal. We should bring out a journal where these sort of points of view are given a refuge, are given a kind of very safe space, because it is simply not safe to put out the point of view of a nationalist in a very reputed journal because of the kind of centuries that they have put up.
Yeah.
And therefore, the first work, in my opinion, something that I had tried in my own way some 3 years ago, but which was forestalled. We should start a publication where the nationalist, scholarly, analytical points of view should be published and put out.
Okay.
From there, a sizable amount of thought will be generated and things will take its own course. That's what I believe.
Right. I'm digressing a little from our core topic here because I'm fascinated with this idea that you're putting forth. But of course, it's largely in the ambit of our discussion today anyway. So, how would that now, the main thing I'm concerned about anything done by nationalists in this case is that it doesn't get even taken seriously. today Desai Deepak's books are finally getting reviewed or at least criticized after like three years of it being a super hit success. So wouldn't they say it's just some Hindutva Fashivadi publication? So screw that. We are not even going to take a look at it.
Well, this is not completely true, because
Okay.
from within nationalist thinkers and writers, we got to see attempts, at least, to put out their thought in analytical and rigorous style. The style in which scholarly publications are done,
Hmm.
or if not scholarly, at all times, serious uh, magazine articles. For
Right.
example, I remember that when Desai Deepak's India, that is Bharat, had come out, I had co-authored a very lengthy uh, uh, review of that
Okay.
book,
Okay.
which got published in Open the magazine. Now that's a
Okay.
mainstream magazine,
Hmm.
and in there, the point of view of a nationalist writer, such
Right.
as myself,
Hmm.
was put out. So we had to struggle, we had to push, and finally it got published. But it is doable, it is possible to do that. I
Right.
do not see many people who take that sort of initiative, and I understand completely well the kind of pressures under which they
Hmm.
have to work.
Hmm.
But we have to somehow find our ways to
Right.
bypass those pressures, those challenges, because this is the
Right.
need of the hour. And if we do not do it, nobody's going to do it for us.
Right. Fascinating idea. Okay, and I wanted to clarify something on this. I wanted your clarification on this. That did he have any specific views on English language education? I ask you about this for every
Professor
guest,
Sarkar.
every person that you talk about, because I get many views from today's Hindutwadis that if you go to convent schools, you'll come out basically a crypto Christian. So it's best that you don't study in an English medium school. But in the end, we see that all our major nationalist scholars are all from convents or English medium schools anyway. So what's going on here? And what did he think of English language education?
So you're asking about Professor Sarkar, right?
Right.
So for a change, let me ask you this question. Based on what I have told you so far, what do you think Professor Sarkar's view would be on English education or Western university based education, liberal education?
He would say that learn English, learn their ways, learn everything, but then use it for your own purposes, for India's purposes.
Yes, absolutely so. In fact, he himself is a great example of adopting that path, adopting that approach. So,
Right.
not just English, I think I forgot mentioning it, that apart from being a polymath, you
Okay.
know, Professor Sarkar was also a polyglot.
I
Polymath
see.
because he had almost an equal grasp of sociology, economics, literary studies, philosophy, history, anthropology, these subjects. And he was also a polyglot because not only the usual fare of Bengali, Sanskrit, and English, he
Yeah.
was very well versed in German, Italian, and French. Okay,
I see.
the proof of his being well versed in these languages lies in innumerable journal articles that he has published in these languages. Well, so he had not only a professional hold on these European languages, which I just mentioned, but he
Hmm.
had the highest level of proficiency in these languages, in which somebody can write out very complex ideas, such as scholarly ideas.
Hmm.
So his articles were very regularly published between 1915 to 1949, the year when he
Hmm.
passed away,
Okay.
in French, Italian, and German journals, and especially in Italian and German journals.
Okay. So,
So,
yeah,
not
yeah, go on.
just English education or university education that
Hmm.
he had welcomed, but
Hmm.
also the entire ambit of Western cultural influence.
You're
So
right.
he was of the opinion that Indian students should be able to assimilate, absorb European ideas, foreign ideas coming from any source. Okay, I mean, he is regarded as a champion of nationalism and national education and Swadeshi thought, right?
Right.
Would you have any idea about his translations of Marxist literature? Like if I tell you that he is the first Bengali translator of certain works by Marx and Engels, such as Family, uh, uh, that famous book. I'm forgetting the title.
Okay.
Family, private property,
Okay.
and
This is the reason
relations.
leftist scholars like have some respect for Binoy Sarkar.
Oh yes, yes. Thanks for pointing that out. I think that is also another reason.
Right.
And he was basically instrumental in familiarizing the Bengali audience who would like to read exclusively in Bengali
Hmm.
with German thought, and especially with modern German thought. So he had translated Fichte, he had translated Herder, he had translated, some works of even Haushofer, and of course Karl Marx.
Right.
So he was proficiently translating, analyzing, and annotating on the thought that was pouring in from Europe. And all of this was being processed from the great analytical mind that he
Hmm.
had. Yes, Family, Private Property, and State by
Hmm.
Engels.
Engels.
So this is a foundational text of Marxist thought, and this has been translated into Bangla by none other than Binoy Sarkar. And he has also commented hugely on Lenin's writings.
Okay.
Vladimir Lenin, whose writings had a great influence on not just Bengali revolutionaries, but also
Yeah.
all sorts of revolutionaries from all
Yeah.
over India. We
Yeah.
get to see that even Bhagat Singh was very fond of Lenin's writings, right?
Yeah.
He used to like quoting Lenin from time
Yeah.
to time.
Yeah.
So this person was instrumental in broadly familiarizing these varied sources of thought in
Right.
politics, in sociology, in economics, many subjects to
Hmm.
the Indian audience.
Right. So, and it seems to me that as far as I know about the history of that era, that seems to be a consensus that learn English, learn their ways, but use it for your own motherland as well. Everyone seems to be saying that. Savarkar to Bankim, everyone, Rabindranath, even now Binoy Kumar Sarkar, everyone seems to be saying that.
Yes, and not just for your own purpose. He was
Hmm.
always emphasizing on creating a new philosophy of your own.
Hmm.
Like if you are a reader of Marx or Lenin or
Hmm.
Kant, for
Hmm.
example, he would say that you should not just read them and be able to reproduce their thought in verbatim.
Hmm.
You should be able to analyze and find out relationship between those streams of thought, those lines of thought on one hand, and the thought process, the points of view that you have inherited in your country, or
Hmm.
even something that you can originally think up.
Hmm.
So suppose you are writing about what you have read in a text by, let's say, Immanuel Kant, the great
Hmm.
German philosopher.
Hmm.
Then you should be able to, first of all, analyze. It should be a critical analysis of Kant's work, Kant's
Hmm.
philosophy. Secondly, you should be able to compare Kant's philosophy with other philosophers from
Hmm.
Europe as well as from India.
Hmm.
Thirdly, you should be able to put out in understandable terms, in understandable expression or language,
Hmm.
what you have compared, and if you have been able to establish any kind of relationship between the various sources of ideas that you are comparing, in this case Kant and let's say Shankara. So you
Hmm.
get to establish a link between, if possible, a link between Kant, for example, and Shankara, for example, Adi Shankara, for
Yeah.
example,
Yeah. Yeah.
or maybe Kant and Vivekananda, for example,
Yeah.
because he often talks about how Vivekananda himself was influenced by the philosophies of these German thinkers, Kant,
Hmm.
Hegel, and Fichte,
Hmm.
not to mention Schopenhauer, who was taking an active interest in Indian philosophy, in Vedanta in
Hmm.
particular.
Yeah.
He even points out, he's, I think, the the first and the only person who has pointed this out, that Vivekananda's very popular term Duridro Narayan, the concept of finding God, Narayana himself, in the poor, in the poverty stricken segment of our country, in the poorer sections of our country. That idea, Bino Sarkar says, has been a result of Vivekananda reading the English scholar and writer Carlyle, who in turn was popularizing the German thinker Fichte's writings in England. So, because Fichte had been talking about finding divinity in the poor, that idea got translated into English by Carlyle in the middle of the 19th century. And because Carlyle was a very popular writer in the times when Vivekananda was studying in college, when he was coming of age, when he himself was a student of philosophy, Vivekananda, Narendranath. So he was influenced by Carlyle, and therefore it is the German idea of Duridro Narayan that is presented by Vivekananda in a very Indian way, using the basis of Indian philosophy. So he has basically been able to establish links between somebody as diverse as Vivekananda from Fichte. This is the kind of analysis that Binoy Sarkar expects from every reader of Western or Indian thinkers and knowledge.
Right. So now the question that everyone is going on asking in the comment section is that what were his views on Nazism and fascism, and did he really say that Nazism is just benevolent dictatorship, and did he, let's say, had a clearer view of Nazism and fascism more than any other Indian probably, or any other person in the world, because he knew those languages themselves. He knew Italian, he knew German. Maybe he had a more grasp on what was going on.
Certainly, that would be a very likely scenario, that because he was conversant in both German and Italian, he was reading the materials coming out of Italy and Germany in the turbulent post First World War years. And he was able to sort of witness firsthand, almost uniquely among the Indians, how German thought was shaping up. But I think it is a gross mistake to say or think that he was a supporter of Nazism or even fascism. Why? Because we have his writings on democracy, we have his writings on socialism, and we get to see that elements of all systems of political thought, all systems of economic thought are combined, assimilated in the kind of economic or sociological thought that he is presenting as his own. For example, he was highly fond of the idea that democracy should be taken to the poorest sections of the country. So I'm sure that you and many of our audiences would be aware that not before the Congress government that came out just after the independence, after the establishment of the Constitutional Republic of India in 1950, we had the idea introduced in this country of universal suffrage, of universal right for voting. Before that, there were very strict criteria as to who could vote, who could register their votes. Firstly, they have to be educated, they have to have certain degrees, okay? Then they will have to be moneyed people, they will have to be wealthy people, okay? They will have to have land in their names. So these were the kind of criteria, which of course is a legacy of the British parliamentary system, because in Britain also, before universal suffrage, again a very late phenomenon, women did not have it, the poorer sections did not have it, only the aristocracy had it for a long time in Britain. So in India also, the British had instituted the same kind of voting rights. Binoy Sarkar was vehemently against this. He was of the idea that it is a gross mistake to think that those who are illiterate are uneducated or unskilled. So he takes pain to explain this, when he's talking to his students or his fanboys like Professor Haridas Mukherjee,
Right.
that every village craftsman, every working class person, be it a farmer, be it a craftsman who creates any kind of craft, who creates anything that will be useful for the uh, usages for
Hmm.
daily life,
Hmm.
should be considered as skilled, and therefore they are always using that skill in order to create a definite a particular standard of living for themselves. It may be very
Right.
poor when you compare it with advanced developed western countries, but
Hmm.
he also points out that the Balkan countries, in the 1920s and 1930s, were not in
Hmm.
a very good shape, and
Yeah.
their economic condition were more or less similar to India, especially
Okay.
in the rural areas. And
Hmm.
therefore, these people, the working class and the farmers, they should be regarded as intelligent people, because they are using their hand, they are using their craft, and any kind of manual labor should be regarded as a sign of intelligence. Therefore,
Hmm.
he was strictly against equating literacy with intelligence.
Right.
And on the basis of this understanding, from this sort of a point of view, he was of the opinion that if democracy has to be instituted as a political system in India, then it
Hmm.
should reach the lowest strata of the Indian society. It should be like voting rights should be given to the poorest of the poor in India. Okay,
Right.
so I do not see how this sort of a view can be put side by side with the
Fascism
fascist
and
point of view.
yeah. Yeah.
And also at the same time, we have to keep in mind that he was greatly admiring any kind of youthful, adventurous initiative. So something that, or somebody like Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, who had shown great sense of understanding and grasp over international relations and real politics,
Hmm.
would be admired by Professor Sarkar, isn't it? Because he's the
Yeah.
one who's talking about the spheres of influence or mandala that comes from the
Yeah.
Niti Saha and the Danda Niti of ancient Hindu political thought. And
Yeah.
when that sort of thing is seen, being put in practice by somebody like Netaji Subhash Chandra, who's also a Indian nationalist, and that to a Bengali, can we imagine a nationalist thinker like Professor Sarkar not admiring the path of action that he has set for himself, that Netaji has set for himself? No. So therefore, if he has praised Netaji, that does not mean that he is giving a sort of go ahead for Hitlerism or Nazism or
Hmm.
even fascism. It
Yeah.
is only based on the historical exigency and the point of uh, uh, necessities that India had felt, or what people like Netaji Subhash or even Professor Bino Sarkar would have felt that India needs. On the
Hmm.
basis of that, these assessments of various world powers of the pre and post Second World War era were presented by Professor Sarkar. Therefore, I
Hmm.
do not think that it would be correct to say that Professor Sarkar was a Nazi sympathizer or a fascist sympathizer.
Right. Srijita, are you aware that at that point, just some years before, some decades before the independence, there were many Bengali Nazis as well, who were not just Nazi sympathizers, who actively thought that, who took the Aryan invasion theory so seriously that they thought that we are Bengali Brahmins, so we are actually Aryans, and Nazism seems to be a great idea. So let's use Nazism to kick out the British. We need a Nazi homeland here as well.
Of course, just as now
Right.
there are such people.
Yeah.
I
So
mean, not
what I'm wondering
Bengali,
is,
but
yeah.
mixed bag of Indians.
Yeah. So did Binoy Kumar Sarkar also believe in Aryan invasion theory? It seems to be
No,
a consensus
no,
back then.
no,
No,
no.
I see.
Why do I say that? Because I get to see a kind of great appreciation for the scholarly work in history and anthropology that Dr. B.R. Ambedkar has created. In
I see.
fact, Binoy Kumar Sarkar has described Dr. Ambedkar as a modern Indian rishi.
I see.
So this is something that should be pointed out, and it can be discussed in maybe another
Yeah.
discussion. But
Yeah.
you get to see that the view that Dr. Ambedkar had put out in terms of
Hmm.
Aryan invasion and how the Aryans were indigenous to India, the
Hmm.
so-called Aryans,
Hmm.
because Aryan is a word that can be used in a ethnic or nationalistic sense in very few instances in the Rig Veda. In
Hmm.
most cases, it is used in the sense of a noble people, okay,
Yeah.
or sometimes when it is being used to describe a kind of ideological point of view, that
Yeah.
there are the dasyus, okay, and the dasyu bhava. So it is the ideological standpoint of a dasyu, and the arya bhava, or the
Hmm.
ideological standpoint of the arya. But ethnically, I do not see that the term Arya can be used in the way that the German scholars and other European scholars, especially German scholars, have used it. And that is something that Dr. Ambedkar has described in his works on the Vedas. And
Hmm.
this is something that was greatly appreciated by Professor Bino Kumar Sarkar.
I
So
see.
I do not find any writings by him, or any even a stray comment that would make me think or believe that he was a believer in the Aryan invasion or even migration theory. I think he used to
I
think,
see.
just like Dr. Ambedkar, that Aryans were indigenous.
I see. Okay. So, Sreejit, I'm still curious that then what did he appreciate about fascism and Nazism, and why did he call Nazism benevolent dictatorship, and did he change his mind later on about this term that he used?
To be honest, I'm not so very sure, because I'll have to really look into his writings in this regard. I
Okay.
haven't, I must
Okay.
confess. And
Okay.
the only thing that I can perhaps say is that, based on historical exigency, he was able to see the evils of the alternative systems, the kind of form
Hmm.
that the imperialism of Britain, or even the potentialities of the imperialism inherent in the USA had, and the kind of resistance that these ideologies and political systems in countries like Italy and Germany were giving,
Hmm.
had perhaps some appeal to Professor Sarkar. But I'm completely sure that he would abhor any idea of uh, massacre of a particular race. He would abhor the idea of genocide of
Yeah.
an entire ethnicity. And I'm
Yeah.
sure that he would have certain purely academic, purely sociological, economic, and political reasons to
Right.
appreciate aspects of these political systems.
Right.
But I'll have to look deeply into it, which I have not done yet.
Okay. And what were his views on independence? Did he want dominion status or like Purna Swaraj?
Yeah, so as a Swadeshi supporter, he was, of course, more radical than the Dominion status supporters.
Hmm.
So he was, of course, in favor of complete freedom for
Okay.
India.
I see.
And in fact, he had written a comparative study on the years when India was undergoing the Dominion status.
Hmm.
So he had, I think, the last publication by him is titled Dominion India in World Perspectives, 1949. It is published in
I
the
see.
same year when he passed away. So it is his final publication,
I
uh,
see.
as long as he was alive. I'm sure
Hmm.
that posthumously many other publications came out. So in
Yeah.
this book, he talks about the sphere of influence that India had already started to exert, and India had uh, potentials within it, even within the Dominion status, to sort of start an ideological empire. So here I am borrowing, the terminology from Bipin Chandra.
Yeah.
So this ideological empire is something that Professor Binoy Kumar Sarkar greatly valued, but he
Right.
was also talking about the importance of materialistic spheres of influence, realpolitik spheres of influence, which is
Right.
why he would be talking about IR, international relations, and
Right.
how the ancient Indian thought on it can be brought out not just in an academic mode but also in a practicable, uh, uh, you know, implementable mode.
Right.
So he was he was first of all an empirical observer, and somebody who greatly valued material studies, materialistic studies. So he would avoid idealistic vantage points. Okay, and he would talk about what India was as he could observe it. So this particular book, Dominion India in World Perspectives, gives a very balanced view of what India could do with what it had got as a dominion status country, and what it should aspire for once that dominion status would be over, perhaps.
Hmm. Right. This is also very fascinating. I'm very surprised that he wanted Purna Swaraj and actively criticized dominion status. This is the most fascinating person you have
Let me
discussed so
be
far.
sure. No,
Right.
sorry for interrupting. Let
Right.
me be very categorical in saying that he is not criticizing the dominion status as such. So
Okay.
his work is not to critique from a point of view that another system or another setup would be better for India. He
I
is
see.
basically observing, collecting data,
Hmm.
mainly economic, political, and sociological data. And on the
Right.
basis of that data and on the basis of those observations,
Hmm.
he is putting out his thought on what sort of spheres of influence India has already been able to capture and practice,
Right.
put into practice. And
Right.
if certain conditions were altered, if certain conditions were changed, then what sort of spheres of influence would open up for India is
Okay.
something that he is also interested in as a purely academic exercise.
Right.
But other one, which is based on hard empirical data, is
Right.
not purely academic. I think there was an activism involved in it, which is something that he has done throughout his career in order to push his country towards a better position so it can
Right.
aspire and see better.
Right. This is even more fascinating. I had never thought when you started this series with on this channel that he would be the most fascinating character among all the people you were going to discuss. Let's see, maybe Sri Aurobindo can beat him. And another thing I'm curious about is what would be Hindu sociology in his view, and what can it be today?
Right. So he found out two main uh, aspects of Hindu sociology, and he put them in these terms that the Hindus were very pragmatic as a race, as a
Hmm.
nationality,
Yeah.
and they were they were carrying out their day-to-day business of administration, of running an economy, of finding new territory and capturing it, all sorts of activities from based on empirical observation, something that he was trying to institute in the current practices of the nationalist politicians and revolutionaries themselves. So
Hmm.
he was of the opinion, not opinion, he was rather showing
Hmm.
by analyzing and mining Sanskrit texts, ancient Indian texts, that
Hmm.
whatever the ancient Indians were doing were based on surveys, was based on censuses, and there was a very elaborate network of gathering hard data from the ground when it comes to creating policies and implementing those policies, not just within the country itself, but also in terms of capturing new territory. So, suppose one particular Hindu kingdom is thinking of leading an imperialistic expedition, that they want to capture a new kingdom, maybe.
Hmm.
So that would be based on, you know, the works of spies,
Yeah.
mainly, but also
Yeah.
works done at the court where the king and his officials are having day-to-day exchanges with ambassadors of various countries. So therefore, a very thorough scrutiny of the culture of another land, which is being thought of as a potentially capturable land,
Hmm.
was done by that empire. And on the basis of that scrutiny, on the basis of that survey, they would strategize, they would think of the ways in which to go about. So that is
Right.
one aspect, that the Hindu society was very pragmatic. And second point is also related to this, that whatever social divisions were done were based on this kind of pragmatic approach. And because it was based on a pragmatic approach, it was not hard and fast. So there was social mobility, and talent was rewarded. Talent was rewarded especially
Yeah.
by those kings, especially by those rulers and administrators who were very liberal in their approach, in
Hmm.
the sense that they were not only thinking about how to preserve the inherited land uh, uh, that he has received from his ancestors, from his father,
Hmm.
but if they are nurturing some expansionist aspirations,
Right.
then they would always cultivate talent. They would also be on the constant lookout for new fresh talent,
Yeah.
and this talent can be acquired not just from within the country but from also from outside the country. Here I'm saying country, but also I should point out that it should be thought of in terms of kingdom, inside the
Right.
kingdom, outside the kingdom. So
Right.
it may be of the same nationality, broadly speaking, but we get to see examples where outside the territories, the geographical territory of India, such talents were acquired.
Hmm.
And this kind of examples are especially present in the most successful dynasties of ancient India, such as the
Right.
Mauryas,
Yeah.
such as the Cholas. Okay,
Yeah.
I mean, there were other dynasties also, the
Yeah.
other kingdoms also, but these two empires were most successful and most liberal in this sense, that they were always on the
Right.
lookout for fresh talent in
Hmm.
administrative terms, in policy framing terms, and in general day to day military practices and military business, right?
Right.
So that pragmatism is something that he has pointed out very clearly. And on the
Right.
basis of this pragmatism, whatever social division, whatever social organization existed in ancient Hindu society existed.
Right. Sreejit, are you aware of someone called Dr. Kaushik Gangopadhyay of IIM Kozhikode?
Yes, I know Kaushikda.
Oh, okay.
He was the
So
person.
I'm a huge.
He was the
Sorry, go
person
ahead.
who had. Yeah, I was saying that Kaushikda is the person who had encouraged me to start translating Sitaram Goel,
Right.
and I had actually
Oh,
translated Sitaram Goel's book "Why I Became a Hindu,"
how
mainly
I
because of
became a Hindu.
sorry, how I became a Hindu. Correct.
Okay, I see. So I'm a huge fan of his book where he has destroyed the idea of majoritarianism.
I have a good
So,
mind to review that book.
okay.
I have bought a copy of it.
Okay. So there he has pointed out that Hinduism or Hindus essentially are a people who have an ever evolving empirical evidence based identity, whereas Abrahamic faiths, not necessarily all Christian countries even, but Abrahamic faiths in general and even communism, socialism, these things are theory based identities where there's one theory কখনো একবার শুরু হয়ে গেছে কবি একবার শুরু হোক and it never changes and you go on enforcing that with an iron fist. Now here you also point out that Hindus are practical, pragmatic. That kind of is why that we have this ever evolving empirical evidence based identity. Now isn't that the reason why we don't have that Hindu unity, and where today even therefore Bengal and UP gets blamed for betraying Hindus because they are being practical?
No, there are two parts in your question. I think the first part that I should address is
Hmm.
how there is a clear distinction between the pragmatism of Hindus, ancient Hindus, and the pragmatism of ancient Europeans as well as modern day Europeans or Abrahamics, as you describe
Hmm.
those groups.
Yeah.
I think that sort of a distinction would be um, uh, would be very far fetched, you know,
Okay.
because this same pragmatism that we have found in the ancient Hindus, especially coming from the works of Professor Sarkar, can also be seen in ancient, medieval, and of course in modern Europeans and the Abrahamics in general. You know, all three great Abrahamic religions and their adherents and the cultures that have been fostered by those religions. So that same pragmatism can be found in those cultures. The second point is that when we say that the electoral debacle that we got to see in Bengal, especially, is because of pragmatism, I think that that is a very low view of pragmatism. I do not
Okay.
think that Professor Sarkar would be talking in terms of pragmatism where a particular government handout based scheme is
Yeah.
appreciated by the people and therefore they are um, voting, their voting patterns are influenced by that particular
Yeah.
policy. I think the pragmatism here would be in terms of the national loyalties also. If uh, there is no existence of something called national loyalty, then there is no meaning of this pragmatism. This pragmatism is actually a death drive. That is something that I'm
Right.
sure Professor Sarkar would have pointed out, because he
Right.
was not working within a time where it was possible to think that somebody could betray national interests despite being an opposition party. You know, there is the ruling and the opposition divide, but
Yeah.
national loyalties are shared by both sides. And of course, the entire population, the people of the country, at least a greater part of it, would have this national loyalty, and therefore they would have a clear idea about who is going to harm their interests and harm the national loyalties at the same time.
I
So
see.
I think that taking this very low view, this I would say low degree view of pragmatism, it would
Hmm.
be incorrect. We will lead us to incorrect conclusions
Right.
about Professor Sarkar and his work if we take
I
this
see.
low resolution view of pragmatism.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Sreejit. And this is the last question for today. Our audience member Abhay is asking, what is the perspective on marriage and family in context to his idea of Hindu sociology? Was it different from Abrahamic societies, and did he have any views on gender as well? Like, what should be the
On
role of a
gender,
man
he
or woman?
definitely, yes,
Okay,
on gender, he definitely had a very clear stand
I
that
see.
educating women has a direct benefit on the economy of a particular society. So he has
Okay.
written very clearly on this, and the work of Sister Nivedita, although he had many differences with Sister Nivedita in terms of views of Indian history and civilization,
Acha.
on that particular aspect of Nivedita's work, where Nivedita was almost with a revolutionary zeal educating Bengali women, you
Yeah.
know, that she was speaking about restoring the educational status of Indian women, and not just intellectual but also moral status. So
Yeah.
Professor Sarkar was of the view that intellectuality and morality were interconnected. So somebody's
Hmm.
morality would improve at least to some extent
Hmm.
if they are given basic education, if they are made literate. Okay, because
I
then
see.
a wider world opens
Yeah.
up before.
Yeah.
Now, again, one can raise the question: then what has happened to very literate states like Kerala and West Bengal? I think again there we will have to fall back on this point of view that something that changes the very nature of citizenship and the relation between the citizen and the state, that national loyalties are compromised. This is the kind of scenario that Professor Sarkar has not experienced in his lifetime. I
Yeah.
think if he had experienced this in his lifetime, many people, even Rabindranath Tagore, if they had experienced these scenarios, I think they would have given some other points of view, something that is not present in their body of work uh,
Hmm.
that we have today. So, this question of educating women was of paramount importance, and
Okay.
so far as marriage and family is
Hmm.
concerned, he was of the opinion that the ancient Hindu system of networking for business and various other professions through family was a very important institution, and he admired individualism, that is a very distinct characteristic of enlightenment or post
Yeah.
enlightenment West, right?
Yeah.
So individualism is something that he sought, that he wanted to bring in his countrymen, in the people of his country. He wanted to
Hmm.
push his people so that they can acquire, if not fully acquire, then at least aspire for that sort of individualism, very strong individualism, but
Hmm.
not at the cost of this system of networks on which
Yeah.
the society can benefit in very many ways. In fact,
Yeah.
we get to see a strain of this thought in Rabindranath as well, or rather, an echo of Rabindranath's thought in Binoy Kumar Sarkar, especially how Rabindranath has expressed this particular aspect of his thought in Swadeshi Samaj. Okay, this
Okay.
is a particular work of Rabindranath which Binoy Sarkar highly admired. And in fact, he has described Rabindranath reading out Swadeshi Samaj in the year 1904 in Minerva Theatre as one of the points of departure for the Swadeshi movement. So
Hmm.
basically, he's of the opinion that when Rabindranath read out this essay, Swadeshi Samaj, to the Bengali audience,
Hmm.
it had created a kind of stir that prepared them mentally for the Swadeshi and boycott methods of the Swadeshi movement. So I think that he had a very uh, respectful view of the Hindu family and the kind of benefits that it accrued, but at the
Hmm.
same time, he wanted to bring a balance between the existing sociological setup of ancient or traditional Hindu society and the individualism which is characteristic of Enlightenment era West. Now,
I see.
again, once again, I should point out that the ills of individualism
Yeah.
were only clear in the postmodern era in the true sense, okay,
Yeah.
which is an era that was not experienced by Professor Sarkar.
Exactly.
So again, if he had he lived through that postmodern era, the changes and the intellectual charlatanism of that era, then
Yeah.
perhaps he would have given some other perspectives.
Right. Right. Fascinating, Srijita. Okay. By the way, what's the who is the next person we are discussing in the next podcast?
I think we should discuss Sri Aurobindo because you
Right.
wanted to see whether Sri Aurobindo can outdo
Yeah. Yeah.
Kumar Sarkar in terms of how interesting they are.
Yeah.
No, I don't think that we should think in those terms. I
Yeah.
think we should look at each of these individuals in the merit of their own thought, and
Yeah.
then again, like Binoy Sarkar would have preferred, we should try and analyze them with the goal of establishing links. If we can
Hmm.
establish links, then it is a weaving of a new philosophy, as Bino Sarkar would have said.
Yeah. And I realize now that I have to immediately read some of his books. I have only read that one paper, that Hindu view of international relations. Okay. Thank
Yes,
you
I think you
for
can
pushing me
you
to do
can
that.
start with the positive background of Hindu sociology. Most fascinating,
Right.
in my opinion.
I see. Okay. So thank you, Srijita. Thank you very, very much for this episode. See you soon.
Thank you. Good
Good
night.
night. Thank you.
श्रवरूढं महाभीमशक्तिधरम्
भीमं गुणाद्रष्टां वरप्रदं हास्ययुक्तं त्रिनेत्रं च कपालकर्णिकाकरां मुक्तकेशीं ललज्जयं पिबन्तीं रुधिरं चतुर्बाहु समायुक्तं वराभयकरं स्मरेत् चतुर्बाहु समायुक्तं वराभयकरं स्मरेत् काली काली